Most people feel free, but the machinery of action starts long before the feeling arrives. Neuroscience often points to a half-second gap, the fact that your brain begins to move before you decide to. This is where the usual panic begins. If the brain acts before the mind knows it, then free will must be an illusion. We're just passengers in a biological machine. Either that, or it requires a mysterious self that somehow steps outside of physics to yank the steering wheel. But there's a simpler possibility. Maybe free will isn't the problem. Maybe the problem is the way the question is framed. Because both sides of the debate assume the same thing, that freedom happens in a moment. And almost nothing important in human life happens in a moment. Hello, this channel explores the phenomenology of the human experience of time, or PHET, a way of understanding how time makes the mind. In the time series, we saw that experience depends on temporal integration, the weaving of memory, attention, and anticipation. If experience is temporally woven, maybe agency is too. Today, I want to show you why the free will debate has been stuck for centuries and what changes once we take time seriously. The traditional debate has two main positions. Determinism says the past fixes the future, so agency reduces to a sequence of inputs and outputs with no room for the person doing the math. Libertarianism says a self intervenes, uncaused, breaking the chain of physics. They disagree about everything except one thing. Both treat time as a sequence of isolated states. Both treat agency as a single point on a timeline. They assume a choice must appear in a single instant, like a spark in the dark. Flatten time, an agency either disappears or becomes magical. That's why the debate never resolves. Think about the last important decision you made. Not a trivial one like picking a cereal, a real one. Ending a relationship, choosing a career, moving to a new city. Did that decision happen in one instant, or did it develop over weeks, months, or years? We talk about decisions as if they were dots, but lived decisions look more like volumes of time. Intentions develop, values stabilize, attention shifts, commitments accumulate. The options that feel available to you are shaped long before you ever choose one. A decision isn't an isolated event, it's a temporally extended process. Once you see that, the half-second gap in the brain doesn't look like a threat anymore. It just looks like the final millisecond on a much longer story. If we stop looking for freedom in the moment of choice, it doesn't vanish, it expands. From a PHET perspective, agency is not freedom from causation. It is freedom through temporal depth. Think of agency as a braid. It is woven from three threads. The past, which has been integrated as memory, the future, which futures are projected as possible, and the present, how those futures are evaluated right now. No metaphysical escape, no uncaused intervention, just structure with depth. Free will is simply the capacity to shape the future using the past in the present. Determinism fails because it treats memory as storage rather than structure. It treats you as a passive object being pushed by the past, rather than a living process that uses the past. Libertarianism fails because it requires an atemporal self, a ghost outside of time. But a choice made by a ghost wouldn't be yours, because you are the continuity. Both fail for the same reason. They flatten time. And once time is flattened, there's nowhere for agency to live. In this view, free will is not a binary yes or no. it's a spectrum. An exhausted person has less agency than a rested one because their ability to project the future has collapsed. Someone under coercion has fewer real alternatives than someone who isn't. This is why flow state feels like the peak of human agency. In flow, your past skills, your present focus, and your future goals are perfectly braided. You aren't choosing in a panicked, momentary way. You are acting with total temporal depth. Trauma compresses agency. It collapses the usable past into a series of triggers, shrinking the future into a narrow corridor. Education expands agency because it multiplies the number of possible futures you can imagine. More temporal depth means more agency. Less depth means less. Once free will is understood temporally, responsibility doesn't disappear. It becomes intelligible. It's not about whether you could have done otherwise in some abstract alternate universe. It's about what futures were genuinely available to you, how well was your past integrated, and were your temporal capacities distorted or truncated. This lets us talk about responsibility without moral absolutism and without nihilism. We can hold people accountable for the trajectory they are building, not just the point they are standing on. Humans lose agency the same way societies do, when time is compressed or erased. In an environment of constant interruption and accelerated attention, our temporal depth is being squeezed. When the past is forgotten and the future feels like a wall, freedom doesn't vanish philosophically, it vanishes structurally. This is why authoritarian systems produce brittle societies. They aren't just controlling what people think, they are collapsing the volume of time people are allowed to inhabit. Change becomes a threat instead of a possibility. The real question was never, are we free or determined? The real question is, how much temporal depth do we have to become who we are? Freedom isn't a moment, it's a trajectory, a braid of past, present, and future. And the shape of that trajectory is what we call agency. If you'd like to follow where this project goes, consider subscribing. In the next video, we'll look at how this same temporal braid defines our sense of identity and what happens when it breaks. I am, therefore I think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.